Brace yourself.
It's pretty difficult to bring up the artistic merit of the video game medium without Shadow of the Colossus sneaking into the conversation. Fumito Ueda's follow-up to the PS2 favorite Ico has, like its predecessor, become a mainstay to the discussion, and for good reason. A striking game with almost immeasurable emotive weight behind its design, Shadow of the Colossus gripped so many players, even nearly 15 years since the original PlayStation 2 release. Its artistic drive was a sight to behold, never straying too far from the mood of Ico, but still standing alone. Shadow of the Colossus never shed the silence of its atmosphere, even as its protagonist Wander triumphantly scaled the giants that traversed the Forbidden Land. But as vast as it was, that world felt so isolated. To its furthest boundary, Shadow of the Colossus emits emptiness, but also captivation. It's a land where nothing truly lives, a dead world, a moment suspended in time, one that's simply beautiful in that eerie solitude. Upon entering the Forbidden Land, the hero Wander is instructed to defeat 16 Colossi. By accomplishing that task, he can successfully obtain his wish of retrieving a maiden's soul from the dead. A brief but effective way to contextualize Wander's journey and give the player a goal to work toward, the story of Shadow of the Colossus is a big part of the game's appeal. But like the disembodied voice that speaks to Wander from above, the stakes of the objective loom and watch overhead. Under the player's control, Wander can't escape his task, even in the moments of frustration, turmoil, and danger. It makes controlling Wander throughout the land feel unsettling, almost like he's trapped there, bound by his goal and unable to leave until it's complete. And I think that was intentional. Despite the player having no real connection to the maiden who Wander is trying to save, the stakes are hushed and implicit. This sense of imprisonment is all the more potent when considering the Forbidden Land itself. Its extensive bridge represents a distance that civilization has with the world, that it's not meant to be approached. And the desire for humanity to stay away from that place makes the land feel foreign and almost ghostly in its presence. It's trapped by that distance, unable to live or breathe by having people visit it. It's a world that feels forgotten and left to rot. After the initial cutscene, the game opens up and has Wander and his horse Agro traversing that vast empty world, tracking down the next Colossus to defeat. Wander's sword focuses the sunlight and pinpoints the general direction of the next adversary, acting as a compass to keep the player moving in the right direction. It's a simple, elegant way to streamline progression, but as much utility as the guiding light has in finding each battle, I wonder how things would be different if there was basically no guidance in finding each Colossus. What if you managed to discover each Colossus simply by exploring the world without the sword beam to push you in the right direction? What if there was no required order to find these massive creatures? This question is semi-rhetorical. There no doubt would be a lot of changes required to fit this different design direction. The two biggest changes would be finding the Colossi out of any prescribed order, and more importantly, forcing the player to aimlessly traverse the world to find each bit of progression. While the first point would have a more free-form structure, especially considering just how diverse so many of the world's environments are, I can see why the second would be troublesome to many players. Stumbling around trying to find the next Colossus might be immersive for the first half hour or so, but after a while, things would get tiring and dull. I'm not against games using less elegant mechanics to build emotive or artistic representations of their themes, even when showing negativity. And Shadow of the Colossus still uses these more cumbersome design directions pretty tactfully. However, removing that order would take things in a different, potentially more mysterious direction, one that would expand upon the world's scope and isolated atmosphere. In fact, I think it would complement the game's thematic elements better this way. Things can get tedious, yeah, but that serves a purpose that Shadow of the Colossus, in a rare moment of missed potential, doesn't fully prioritize. But even without this more open-ended design, Shadow of the Colossus encourages exploration. You need to go where the game directs you to progress, but the light can only get you so far. Eventually, you'll need to be a bit more adventurous and introspective to get where you need to go. Cutscenes do pan and show essential parts of the environment at times, but interestingly enough, these moments are signals of a more free-form exploration brewing. This is because Shadow of the Colossus, when stripped away of that waypoint-driven structure, harkens back to the age of early adventure games like The Legend of Zelda. They don't hold your hand too much, encouraging the player to be curious and explore whenever they can. Even in its map design, Shadow of the Colossus removes the clutter of other games who capitalize on expansive worlds to explore. There's a sense of fundamentalism here, where the distractions are so few that the world feels bigger and more mesmerizing in its small intricacies. Because of this, Shadow of the Colossus really sells its world. Individual biomes are striking and remarkably diverse, like a small forest grove tucked away above a giant waterfall, or a sprawling desert on the other side of a mountain. These locations have their own sense of place, and even if you take away the wanderlust and satisfaction of discovering them, there are small collectibles to find that create a light framework of gameplay. But I don't even think the game needed those. There is fulfillment in this vast empty world, a sense of discovery that few other games of its era nailed. At the time, Shadow of the Colossus had a massive world, but even when looked at today, it hits a strange equilibrium. In spite of that emptiness, it gives the world a breath, but it doesn't feel big in a needless context. It just fits, and considering just how few landmarks there are throughout, that's pretty damn impressive. With all this in mind, examining the world of Shadow of the Colossus is kind of a paradox. Despite having so few landmarks to show in its world considering its size, it manages to emit so many emotions in that emptiness. It channels that feeling of being in an alien space, one where humankind is not meant to dwell. Remnants of temples covered in overgrowth detail a population that once was. Giant coliseums signify a venue where thousands of people gathered. Palaces atop mountains with colossal pillars and paths. It all feels so fallen. Despite holding history of civilization across its many regions, the Cursed Land is disturbing in its stillness. Like a photo of an abandoned building, it tells so much by what is missing, by what isn't there. It truly is a dead world. And this isn't limited to the environments. The colossi roaming the various areas of the map act like giant automatons. Their glowing eyes are leering and otherworldly, and, in most cases anyway, their movements are slow and almost hypnotized. Even in their more animated and energized forms, they don't appear alive, merely stalwart guardians of each region. In a way, this was necessary on a gameplay level, because too much movement would limit the player's ability to climb them effectively. Even having the Colossus flail to shake Wander off can be exhausting and intrusive, and the Colossi that do have more animated movement rely on the environment as solutions to their puzzling structure, or they're large enough to make climbing more streamlined and less of a chore. But that lack of activity only serves that narrative of stillness that Shadow of the Colossus is always emitting. These beings act as guardians, but not living ones. They move as if they're reanimated, acting out of confusion or merely self-defense. They're just as dead as the world they protect, and Wander's intrusion upon that solitude and isolation causes them to stir and act out. The Colossi are remnants of the idolatry that permeated the civilization before, and watching them awaken from their sleep confused and threatened only pushes the narrative that this world isn't a place where Wander or any human has a right to be. Yet Wander appears, bringing with him an objective that brings the land's quiet titans to life, frustrated and defensive. Really, this interpretation isn't anything new. There have been countless analyses of lore and meaning behind Shadow of the Colossus, and for good reason. There really is a lot to talk about. It's not an uncommon perspective that these colossi are martyrs and that Wander is an instigator of a much larger crisis solely by his presence in the Cursed Land. The ending alone sort of validates that interpretation. The symbolism is so deeply woven, constantly giving new life to theories and explanations of what is actually a very quiet narrative. What little dialogue exists doesn't give too much away, and the game's climax unveils a predictable, but still meaningful twist. Instead, Shadow of the Colossus is displayed unorthodoxly. The world around Wander is lifeless, and the only things still walking across this dead land are beings that can barely be called alive at all. Revisiting Shadow of the Colossus nearly 15 years later is complicated. It's a brilliant game that feels impossible to replicate even by its creator's additional works, one untouchable in its rebelliously simple design and heavy emotive weight. But revisiting it kind of delivered a problem for me. This isn't a game you can really experience the same way as you did the first time you played it. Seeing a Colossus emerge from the landscape is a freeze frame, no different from the Cursed Land Wander explores. You can't match that moment. You can't feel the same way as you did the first time you laid eyes on the monster emerging from a dark cave or rising from the desert sands. And this isn't merely a situation where you know the solution to a puzzle or anticipate the twist in a story, because while both are true, they're not what I'm referring to. This is something more cognitive. On that first journey, Shadow of the Colossus produces a feeling that erodes away with familiarity. Yes, I've played plenty of games whose initial playthrough was so special to me and that could never be duplicated in a revisiting. But Shadow of the Colossus is lightning in a bottle, a single shot that managed to hit the bullseye from a mile away. I have a lot of reverence for this game and the people who created it, but it is reverence that can't be matched 15 years later. I can't feel the same way about Shadow of the Colossus as I did playing the game back in 2005 on the PlayStation 2. It was a striking, singular moment. And when I really think about this, it's clear that, as much as Shadow of the Colossus is a product of its time, the artistry from its premise and execution is untouchable. Like the dead world you explore, Shadow of the Colossus really is a moment suspended in time.